Joe, thank you very much for being with us. So I'm Helen. I wear a people and partnerships set of hats at Cadence. Can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure, thank you very much for having me. My name's Jo. I am founder of a company called Vision 29, which I actually founded back in 2013 as a marketing business. And I ran that for about 7 years. But in that time, I discovered the power of internal comms and employee engagement. And I decided to move away from the marketing side. I went in-house. I had a couple of roles in-house, heading up internal comms teams, just to get that experience. And then last year, I came back out again and restarted Vision 29, but this time with a complete internal comms, employee experience, and organisational culture angle. And I really anchor everything off of the power of employee listening. So creating happy, healthy, and engaged workforces through listening to employees and giving them a voice.
So can you help those that might not know much about internal comms? Because it's not something, and as I said, it's a bit of an obsession of mine at the moment, but it's not something that I think gets enough attention in this, world of hybrid and future of work. So can you help people understand what internal comms looks like when it's done really well, what it is, and what happens when it's working?
Internal comms, I always see internal comms, like in its purest sense, as being the way to communicate the organizational strategy and to align everybody to the company's purpose, its vision, and how it's going to achieve its goals, and that's in its purest sense, and that's what it should be. But I find, and I definitely found this, that kind of internal communicators, as much as you're communicating to the employees about the business strategy, and you need to align everybody so everyone knows what their role is in delivering that strategy. The world of work is so much more than just delivering a business strategy, and it's about relationships and engagement and communicating and kind of all that other softer stuff. And so I think internal communicators often spend as much time on the kind of the whole package of the business, rather than just communicating that communicating the core internal comms part of the strategy. And for me, certainly what I found was the more I got into the roles when I was in-house, I much more enjoyed all of the other stuff. The what's in it for me, for the employees, is much more interesting and kind of more fun and engaging than just communicating the company strategy. And I think that's why over time I've even moved more away from internal comms into employee experience and organizational culture, because that's where the real power happens, and kind of the sparks fly. And internal comms again just becomes a vessel or a way of kind of bringing all of that together.
Thinking about the organizations that we work with, some are very large and will have an internal comms function, but some won't. So what's your suggestion for those that don't necessarily have somebody with that hat on? Do you see certain functions taking on or being well suited to taking on internal comms? How should organizations be thinking about that if it's just not something yet that they have always in place?
So if you're quite small, then you probably have informal ways of communicating anyway, which is probably quite fine. And especially if you know that kind of you have certain ways, so just quite naturally information might cascade through, or you might have they might have monthly business updates or whatever, and that might be enough if they're at a certain size and it's working. If it's not working, then obviously they need to focus on and think about how they're going to address that. And also, as they grow or as they scale, then, and particularly if they're going to go through a period of high growth, then to kind of to plan for that and to get your comms function in place before you do it would be highly recommended. In terms of where it should sit, I mean, I guess in my ideal world, I think comms should sit directly with the CEO, so that you have that kind of that voice in the ear straight away with the CEO and at the most senior level in the business. But also, I don't think it really matters where it sits as long as you have those relationships. So you could sit within marketing, you could sit within HR, they're the usual places where it would sit. But as long as its purpose is fully understood, and its role is fully respected, by all of the senior stakeholders, and internal communicators are allowed to get on and do what they need to do to connect everybody and bring everybody together in the right way. I'm not too bothered about where it sits.
I personally am often finding that there is a comms issue, that a certain part of the organisation has been asked to help figure out what hybrid means, but on their own, of course, that organisation, or I say, of course, it feels obvious, but for a lot of organisations, it isn't necessarily. One team can't figure hybrid out for the whole business. And so they're trying to figure out a strategy for hybrid and then roll that out without having listened to or communicated with the teams and the wider organization. So yeah, where do you typically start if you were to get a piece of work with an organization like that perhaps has tried and not found it done so well with a hybrid working strategy, that perhaps people are not coming into the office regularly? There's just this post-COVID kind of, and for a lot of organizations, it feels a little bit sad. There's a bit of a sadness of like, oh, are we losing our culture? What's going on? And what do we do? Yeah, what would you suggest? Where do you start?
So yeah, you talked about one team, didn't you? And I think that's a place to start, is not to have a team. So not to put it all on IT or facilities or whatever. But I would choose a cross-functional team, with representation from across the business. So I always think the powerhouse of anything like this, where it's kind of cross-company change, you need to have representation from your people team, from your IT team, and from your internal comms team at minimum, and also any other key stakeholders. So if you've got kind of large teams, or if you're global, you've got to have representation from different offices and so on. And you need a good strong sponsorship from your leadership, so that that your leaders are going to be behind everything. And then for me, I would then start with a deep listening exercise. So I would listen to all people within the business. So, from the senior leaders through the middle management, who are absolutely pivotal in this kind of process. And then, kind of your whole scale employee community as well. And I think often, when you say that we're going to do a listening exercise, the assumption is made that anything we hear, we're going to implement, and that we're kind of almost held a bit ransom to what the employees want or expect. And so I think, for me, that isn't the case at all. It's listening, but with a very clear, kind of scope, that we're going to listen and take all this on board, and then we're going to implement the right solution that's right for us as a business, for our leaders, for our stakeholders, whether that's, kind of investors or customers, and, also for the employees at large. So it's not kind of, oh, well, I don't know, I'm a mum or a carer, so I have to go and do the school run every day, and so that's the reason that I don't want to come into the office ever. It's the listening shouldn't really be teasing that out. It should be teasing out, what would the best experience be for you, kind of how would a cadence of work for you, how do you need to work with your teams in order to be effective? Where's the best place for you to work to be effective? What type of work do you need to do where? So we're asking questions like that, rather than kind of creating that kind of we not me mentality, as opposed to it's this is what I want and nothing else is going to work. So following the deep listening exercise, I'd then kind of look at kind of what the recommendations are. I did this before, and we came up with a company-wide kind of ways of working kind of principles that we needed as a company in order to be able to move forward. And it took into account things like work is about what you do rather than where you do it. That we not me mentality. We had a minimum of 20% of your working week needed to be in the office. That got turned around by the middle management to 1 day a week, which I got a little bit frustrated about, to be honest, because 20% of your working week is very, very different to 1 day a week. And I'm a real firm believer that we shouldn't be talking in days a week in the office. Obviously, if you've got a long way to travel, or if for your team that works, then that's great. But also, kind of to have that flexibility to work from home in the morning, commute in out of rush hour, have my meetings over lunch, come back, later or in the afternoon or whatever, then if that works for me and it works for my team and it works for me on that day, that's much more effective than being, kind of mandated to come into the office on a day when other people aren't going to be in the office. And I'm sure that's what, kind of Cadence as a technology can help really support people with. So your time is much more effective and more efficient. So then, we had these company-wide principles. I think there's about 10 of them, and then we launched those. We did training, kind of, because it's a mindset thing and a cultural thing, and a lot of the time, not even the leaders are struggling with it. It's that middle management team that kind of are not used to or haven't been provided with the tools and the skills and the support to change their mindset to manage in a hybrid way. So there's a lot of time, and you need to invest a lot in them to make sure that they're okay with this way of leading and managing, and kind of monitoring and supporting team members. And then we did, and I know you guys have done this too, but we empowered all of the teams to come up with their own way of working and their own cadence. So along with these company principles, they all then went away and worked out how they needed to work in order to be effective and to do their jobs properly. And every team came up with something different. So, for example, the IT team, they came up with 80% of their working week needed to be in the office because they're providing support to people who would always be in the office in some way or another. HR landed on 40% and internal comms landed on 20% because internal comms needs to be wherever you need to be at any time. So some weeks we might be in the office 120% of the week because we're delivering on-site events, and other weeks, we don't need to be in at all. And so, we kind of landed on that. But I think the beauty of that is everybody feels that they've had a voice. They feel that they have influence over when, where, and how they work. They're getting all the support that they need from the tech point of view because we scoped out the right tech, redesigned the office so that it's set up for, kind of more collaborative working. And then we piloted it. So we piloted it for 3 months. We got feedback, we adapted, and then we kind of set it in stone. And I think piloting is really important. And I think a lot of companies miss that step. So they go out with this, right, this is how it's going to be. You launch it, it doesn't quite work for whatever reasons. And you almost feel you're stuck now because, you kind of just went out with this thing without this, the pilot is your opportunity to test, iterate, adapt, and change. So for me, that works really well. It takes into account all of the key factors that I think you need to take into account when you're launching hybrid working.
Yeah, love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's super clear. And there's a few things in there, for example, team leads not being expected to just figure all this out, but having that like company-wide, this is what we're going to do, this is the process we're going to go through, but then with your team figure out what it is that's going to work for you. Because I think there's often one extreme or the other. It's either team lead just doesn't know where to start, like they've got like people saying different things about what they want and don't want, and not knowing how hard they can say no, that's not going to work for the team, or yeah, just go for it. Like not knowing how to get that balance right, not having had any training, coming out of COVID, just being expected to manage in a really new way but without any training. And then you talked about like the stakeholders. So much of this we're seeing just depends, the success of it depends on if senior leadership are aligned, and they're modeling it, are they doing what this process ended up coming up with? Are they coming in the times in the week that they've suggested that they will, and are they encouraging their team to do the same thing or not? Is it one rule for leadership and a different for the team?
And that's really important, isn't it? So, for the wider employees to see the ways of working being role modelled by leaders and managers is absolutely crucial. And if they're not, and if the managers are in all of the time, then that creates that void, and kind of impacts on the psychological safety. And for people, the whole thing, well, if I'm not in, then I'm going to not get that promotion, or whatever. So yeah, it definitely needs to have good, strong buy-in from senior leadership and managers, and to be role modelled for it to be effective. And I think that is where you need to be able to put each other up on it as well, kind of, and
Mm.
just call it out, um, and understand what are the blockers. So if there are certain managers or senior leaders that aren't on board with it, and they're not role modelling it, then it's understanding why and giving them
Yeah.
the support, whatever that might be, to help them to adapt to it.
Yeah. And I suppose having gone through the process of asking employees in their teams what works for them and their team, and piloting it, like you're saying, then team leads, senior leaders can go back to those employees and say, hey, like, this is what we came up with together.
Yeah.
And we need to understand why you're not working in the way that we thought was going to work for you because you were part of the process. I wonder if that's one of the things that's so hard, for a lot of organizations. If they haven't gone through that process, then they are struggling to communicate, and have good reasons to say, we don't feel like you're working in the way that the wider organization wants you to work. Because they didn't do a bit of a two-way. They didn't have that
Yeah.
process earlier, so it's a difficult one to then.
And I think this is where internal comms really has a huge role to play. So, um, uh, internal comms, I think, is like the conscience of the business. And whether your leaders, however your leaders lead, I think as an internal communicator, you've got the opportunity to make sure that comms are open, transparent, two-way. And in doing that, what you're doing is you're creating that kind of, that bond or that trust or whatever. Um, and in that instance, it's really important to kind of say, well, we asked you, you said that you wanted to do this, it isn't working, tell us again why, or it is working really well, what can we do to make it better? But yeah, it's almost like that, that kind of that contract between everybody. And I think that's where internal comms really does come into its own.
Yeah, because I know for most employees, it's frustrating if something's been agreed and then you see people around you kind of not doing what you agreed you were all going to do, and then it's the trust starts to be eroded. Like, well, why did we bother with this process if half the company's not going to follow the process? And so yeah, when I'm just thinking back to this parent-child, model, like if we're just leaving the employees to just continue to work however works for them with no wider agreement and no kind of working through that together as an organization, then yeah, those in that organization that really are responsible want to be seen to be working, autonomously but consciously, and doing the right thing by the business, are just going to continue to get frustrated and likely move on at some point.
I think the other thing is there's no one size fits all, and this is what I keep seeing a
Yeah.
lot at the moment as well. It's kind of like everyone back to the office, everyone in the office 3 days a week, and it's
Yeah.
like, well, I think it's worse than what it was even before
Yeah.
COVID. At the moment, like there was flexibility, whereas we seem to be removing all of that flexibility. You're getting, you know, um, scanned in and out of the office to make sure that you're coming in on the days that you're meant to come in, and all that sort of stuff. And I
Mm.
think I think it's much more effective when we recognise and accept that there are different parts of every business that will and always have worked differently. So, sales, for example, on the road a lot more, hardly ever in the office,
Mm.
and there was always that kind of, sales get an easy ride because they're here, there, and everywhere. And obviously, that's not the case. Marketing, when I was in marketing, I travelled the world. I was in a tech company, and all of the engineers, they would be like, oh, like, you guys are always off having a great time traveling the world. And it was like, well, we actually give up a lot of our time to do that, weekends and evenings with families and everything. So I think to recognize that, um, and to communicate that and make that okay, so that people understand that it's not always greener somewhere else. You've
Yeah.
got the whole shop floor, or kind of warehouse based staff that have got to be on site to do their job, and then that versus head office where we're trying to implement hybrid working or whatever. And again, it's this them and us mentality. And I think again, internal comms really comes into its own, where it's able to communicate effectively that there are different teams and departments that need to work in different ways, but as a business we'll celebrate everybody and your commitment and kind of your performance in different ways that's also personalized to how you work. So it may be that kind of office-based staff, sorry, not office-based staff, that kind of shop floor staff or whatever, their career paths are kind of, there's more career paths to enable them to move into head office type roles if they want that, for example, so that people still feel included. And I think that's really important as well nowadays, is just looking at all of that and making sure that no matter where you work or how you work, you're still part of this big organization. And if you want to change things up, then we'll help you and support you to do that.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think
Yeah.
there's more to come here with you. So thank you for spending the time with us.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me on. It's been really good, and it's been quite good just talking more internal comms and hybrid working. So thank you very much.